Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing the book Postscript Tag, and I have decided that since I haven't been able to make a lot of videos at the end of this year, and there are lots of things that I like to do at the end of the year, I'm going to be doing a week of videos, and so I thought I would kick it off with the book Postscript Tag as a nice little way to summarize some of the reading that I've done so far in 2022. So far, there's like a couple days left. So the first question is, what is the longest book that you read this year, as well as what is the book that took you the longest to read this year? And so the longest book that I read this year was Wives and Daughters, which according to the story graph was 720 pages. I mostly listened to this as an audiobook, but I did have the ebook copy going as well. I read this as part of the Chunky Chapter Book Club, and I definitely would not have picked up this book if it wasn't for that. But I ended up enjoying it for the most part. And then the second highest one was Great Circle with 608 pages, which I didn't pick up because of the Chunky Chapter Book Club. I picked that one up because I decided to read through the entire Women's Prize shortlist this year, and that one was also a relatively good experience. It was a mixed bag experience, actually. That's what I should say about it. As for the ones that have taken me the longest to read over the course of the year, that one is a little bit harder for me to quantify because I am really bad at specifying when I start books. I will mark when something is finished being read, but I usually don't mark when I start reading stuff. But basically all of the Chunky Chapter Book Club books I generally read over the course of an entire month because I create a schedule, and for the most part I tend to space it out pretty well, and they tend to be longer books anyway. So any of those would probably fall into the category of the one that took me the longest to read. The next prompt is a book that was outside of your comfort zone. And for this one, I have two answers for different reasons. The first one is The Distance Between Us by Renato Cisneros, translated by Fionn Petch. This one is outside of my comfort zone because it is kind of like autofiction almost. It's nonfiction, but it's not. There's a whole thing about it that I talked about when I wrapped this one up. But also this book is basically like a biography that the author is writing about his father, who was this really infamous general in Peru, and it deals with a lot of historical stuff that happened in Peru and all this stuff that I have literally no background knowledge of. And so this is a book I picked up completely on a whim and ended up really enjoying it, but it's definitely something that felt outside of my comfort zone for sure. The other one that I would say was outside of my comfort zone was The Bone Shard Daughter. And this is a book that I picked up because I decided to do a video this year where Wordle picked my book that I read for the day. And I remember the word was shard, and so I picked up The Bone Shard Daughter. This is a fantasy book, and it is a book that, again, I never would have picked up if I wasn't doing the Wordle Picks My book game. I had, again, a mixed bag experience with it. I don't think I'll be continuing on with the series. That sort of fantasy book is not what I'm typically going to gravitate towards. Not that I obviously have anything against fantasy books. I read them, but again, just not a thing I typically pick up. Questions number 3 and 4, I'm going to combine. The first one asks, how many books did you reread? And then the next question is about what your favorite reread was. And I haven't reread any books this year. I haven't reread a book in a very long time. And so, yeah, don't have answers for these outside of the fact that I can say I didn't reread anything. The next prompt is asking about a book that you read for the first time this year that you look forward to rereading in the future. And like I just said, I don't reread very often. It's genuinely really, really rare that I will reread books. And so it was very hard for me to go through the list of books this year and try to really think of what I would realistically reread in the future and to look forward to it. And the only thing that I could think of is Run Book 1. This is the next set of comics that follow John Lewis's life. So after the March trilogy, they're coming out with a run. I don't know if it's a trilogy or not, but it's definitely a series because there's a book 1, and it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger and things like that. And so depending on how long it takes before the next book comes out, I could see myself rereading this one. I could also see myself rereading it to gain some additional context once the series is finished and things like that, because there's a lot of details in here, and I know that I'm remembering less of the details from this than I did with March because it's covering a part of history that I know less about, and I think that's just true in general. A lot of people know about the civil rights era that happened in the 1960s, but once we start getting into the 1970s, there's less general awareness about it. And so yeah, I could see myself rereading this one once the other books in the series come out. The next prompt is to name your favorite single short story or novella that you read in the year. And this was really difficult because it's not like I read a lot of single like short stories in like the New Yorker or anything like that, or even haven't read a single novella so far this year. I did read this short story collection. I read a couple short story collections, I should say. This was my favorite, but I had such a hard time picking a favorite because I liked so many of them. The first one in here won the O. Henry Prize, but I wouldn't say that one was my favorite. There's one called Number 16. Yeah, Number 16 Model House Road, which is about this woman sort of like asserting her rights in a relationship to a certain degree. There's another one about a mom who is grieving the loss of her child after a school shooting. Yeah, there's a couple of really fantastic short stories in here, so I'll just highlight those two because it's really hard to pick just one. The next prompt is mass appeal. What is a book that you read this year that you could recommend to a wide variety of readers? And for this one, I think I'm going to go with Lessons in Chemistry because it already has pretty mass appeal. Like, it's been a pretty popular book this year, and I feel like I know lots of different people who have read it. And so I feel like for the most part, people will enjoy this book. Where they fall on the spectrum of liking it to loving it will probably vary significantly. I'm closer to the like it scale, and I also feel like if you're someone who reads like a lot of like literary fiction and things like that, you may not like this book as much, but I feel like this is a book that in my head I would consider having pretty wide appeal. Like if someone was like, oh, hey, I don't read very much, recommend a book to me, I could probably say Lessons in Chemistry or something like that. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, the next prompt has to do with specialized appeal, which is what is a book that you liked but would hesitate to recommend to anyone else. And so there's two for very specific reasons. The first one is A Practical Wedding by Meg Keane. Not that I would necessarily hesitate to recommend this to people. I actually really loved this book and thought it was really fantastic and would highly recommend it to people who are starting off on the wedding planning process. But the number of people who are starting out on the wedding planning process is probably smaller in number. And then the other one is The Sabbath Book by Dan Allender that I read a couple months ago. I don't know where my copy of it is right now. My room is a mess. But I talked about that in, I think, my October wrap up, and I'll link the correct wrap up in the cards in case you're interested in checking it out. But it's basically a book about Sabbath. And so I can imagine that if you are not religious or you are someone who doesn't fall into either Christian or Jewish religion, a book about Sabbath might not necessarily appeal to you. And I also know that like in general, people might be put off by a religious book or a book that deals with religion. And so that's one where I'm just like, I need to know your vibe when it comes to that stuff before I can recommend a book about Sabbath. But also like there's a lot of thoughts and beliefs and ideas about the idea of Sabbath, even if you do fall into a Jewish or Christian context. People believe that the Sabbath is for different things and you should or shouldn't be doing certain things and stuff like that. And so I could very easily see someone who does practice the Sabbath not enjoying this book very much or being very annoyed by this book too. So yeah, very, very niche appeal here. All right, the next prompt, and kind of the final prompt, is to reflect on your year as a bookish creator. And so this is a very interesting year for me. A lot of things in my life have changed, and so I feel like I've kind of fallen out of the bookish community quite a bit. Like, I don't know quite as much about like books that are coming out anymore. I read a little bit less than I used to, or at least that I have in the past couple of years, and I feel like the books that I'm picking are just like very niche. I feel like before I could very easily like look at, people's favorite books of the year, the top books of the year, and be like, oh yeah, I've read these handful, or I've at least like heard about or excited about these handful. And I feel like this year, like I just wasn't feeling it. It's been like a weird and interesting experience this year. I've been feeling like very disconnected from bookish stuff this year. And I think part of it's me, part of it is just like life circumstances changing, and that requires my attention to be elsewhere and things like that. I do feel like I've made some fun videos this year. Like I mentioned the Wordle one. I did a vlog where I read the short list for the Women's Prize. I did the reading these overhyped books and talking about whether or not I thought they were overhyped or not. And they've had like varying degrees of success over time. So I feel like I did like push myself a little bit with my video making, which is kind of nice. But I'm definitely not someone who naturally wants to vlog all the time. Like when I have these very specific themed ideas. I enjoy vlogging, but I can't just do reading for a week vlog because I don't have the energy or capacity to just like constantly be filming. And so I have a really hard time with vlogs. I either need like a very small constrained amount of time, so doing it over 24 hours or a weekend, or just only picking up the camera while I'm reading these specific books and things like that. And yeah, I've just been feeling a little bit off with my reading and therefore my video creating. I feel like a lot of people that I've followed on BookTube over time have like, dropped off, which is the nature of things like this. And so just like figuring out what I want to be doing, the books I want to be reading, the type of things I want to be pushing myself to do while also trying to take care of my own mental health and trying to keep my life relatively balanced, because at the end of the day, this is a relatively low priority hobby. Not low priority hobby, but it is a hobby. And so other things are going to take priority. Like I go back and forth on like whether it's time for me to stop or not, but I still do like having a place where I can talk about books. And so I think sometimes I also need to just remind myself that to lower the stakes a little bit and just enjoy myself and have fun. So yeah, it's been a bit of a mixed bag in terms of my reading and a bit of a mixed bag in terms of my consistency on here and things like that. Going from, 10 years ago, making 2 videos a week, every week. My life can't sustain things like that anymore. I'm lucky if I get 1 video a week up. And yeah, and just kind of coming to terms with that and being okay with that and just doing what I can when I can. So yeah, that is basically the book Postscript Tag. At this point, I'm supposed to tag people, but it's the end of the year and I don't really know who's going to be doing this tag or who wants to do this tag. I'm always really bad at tagging people, so I'm just going to say, if you're watching this video and you would like to do this tag, consider yourself tagged. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.